Well, good day. Dr. Michael Fisher here with Dr. Cara Judea Alhadeff. We are here to explore another version. It's our second version of really a fear talk that will look at various issues. We talked about childhood, we talked about alternative eco villages, we've talked about the world of supply chains and consciousness of supply chain and the role of the artist in aesthetics and lots of good things. Always interesting talking with you, Cara. How are you today?
I am revved up, Michael.
All right.
Surprise, surprise. It's already
Anything,
been a very
anything,
full.
anything particular revved up?
Well, would you like me to jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just attending Jewish Women's Archive, a nonprofit, as far as I know. They are hosting a series on what they're calling global ethnicity and race in Jewish communities. And I am finding the tokenism challenging and the redundancy of whitewashing within the Jewish community exhausting. And that converging, for example, with a late night evening activity I had last night around local finances and local economies in relation to corporate capitalism and the obfuscation of ways of being in relation that are so radically different that it is so difficult for people to begin to even imagine. And the convergence of these two public challenging interactions, I'm just aware of my body having a reaction to many reactions to. So I'm in a somatic let's just say disorientation right now as we're coming in, which is fine. It's familiar and absolutely relevant, I'm sure, to what we will be discussing.
Yeah. In the last talk, Cara, thanks for entering there. And
Laura,
uh,
please.
Cara, sorry.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
thanks for entering with, cutting right through with being somatically real, so to speak.
Yeah,
And
yes.
located in the place that you're in, could you even just give us a sense of the place that you're in as you sit before us and how it's probably related to everything you just mentioned too in some way?
It is. It is absolutely. My students at UC Santa Cruz would or some of them would not be appreciating the connection. Especially with the Sephardic Arab Jewish references and really feeling suspicious of those connections. But yes, I feel the fact that I'm in our family's school bus, converted school bus. This is part of my new nonprofit, Radical Art in Action. Did I mention that? Did we speak? We did speak about that. Okay. So Radical Art in Action, this element focuses on creative, affordable housing. Obviously site specific because it, I was going to say it can only be done in certain environments, but as a matter of fact, for example, Joanna Macy's uh, primary assistant, her daughter asked my husband, Wild, who was obviously central to this conversion, to convert a bus for them to live in the middle of Oakland. So uh, that's obviously an example of super duper urban environment. And here we are on the top of a mesa surrounded by the Rockies, at the
Okay.
at the edge of the Rockies, surrounded by the mesas in Colorado. So there's often an implication of, and we can get into these complexities and contortions of privilege, entitlement, yet our home, which has housed two adults and now a teenage boy and very large dog for about 7 years in very hot climates, wet climates, cold climates, because we lived in the rainforest on the East Coast in North Carolina, and now for several years in Colorado, where it's frequently below zero this winter. So it's a space of, I would say, generosity, of refuge, both for the objects that create this space and certainly for our own bodies and psyches. And I'm happy to go into some of those details. But that's where I am right now, and this eco art. Again, the aesthetics, as we were speaking about, aesthetic vocabulary as a guide for social, political interventions. This space very much is building on that kind of aesthetic commitment and solace. Um,
Okay.
and so along those lines, I want to mention it's the 100th year anniversary of surrealism in a European context. And solace just reminded me of that. Um, the idea of beauty in a space of non-normalcy, in a space of folded edges, as Bio would say, frothing edges. Um, as I live, as I work, as I parent in this bus, um, in our home, I'm very aware of the necessity of beauty as integral to what it means to really be a functioning full person.
I mean, in my language, that doesn't sound like a romantic beauty or, a classical sense of beauty that some people might gather. It feels like it's very much contextualized with the social, political, economic conditions,
Yes,
right? Like I love that intersection that art doesn't have to be somehow transcending that, even though it has capabilities to help us move beyond. I think in identification and in pleasure and joy and all the ways we experience it. But yeah, I think that's what I like
sensory.
about your work.
Yeah,
You take art and aesthetics in philosophy, just for example, into those contexts. So you're riled up, and last time you said something about, and I live in shock all the time. We're talking about fear
yes,
talk, and I'm going, how do you do that? I'm obviously beauty, sanctuary, your place of residency, all those
yeah.
things. But it really is fascinating to me because, are you still really shocked by the things like, for example, this conference you're listening to and your whitewashing going on within the Jewish community? Are you shocked by that? I mean, or is it just an expression? Is there something else deeper there? Do you want to tweeze that out a little bit?
Hey, let's see. What's shock? I would say it's shock because I feel a rawness in my nervous system,
Okay.
because I feel the frayed, again, edges as a space of fertility. So the shock does not lead to impotence.
Right.
The shock leads to a certain let's see, I just had the image of an octopus when I would imagine, because I've never touched an octopus. I have an octopus on my body,
Mm,
um, but wrapped around my body, tattooed around my body. But what I would imagine, because of the depth of its empathy, um, and how it transforms based on its context,
right.
its actual structure, its cellular relationality, is so tremendously vibrant. I would call it shock. And if I could weave this back just into the beauty issue and what you were speaking about, a traditional or a conventional sense of beauty, I am shocked. I am dumbfounded. I am um, uh, in a state of perverted radical amazement, I'll say, um, referring to Rabbi Heschel's
Right.
joyous radical amazement. Um, when beauty is defined through mass production, through a familiar lens that is easily digestible. Um, Thinking about, did we talk about Paul Taylor's dance company, for example? Um, so thinking about, for example, in dance, very popular dance companies where the body, an arm is an arm. Um, an arm relating to a leg is an arm relating to a leg. There isn't the risk of transmutation.
Mm.
And when beauty, for example, in a home, if a home is defined as beautiful because it is considered safe, um, in the familiar, yet most likely it is off-gassing because the products perhaps are new, perhaps made in China. The radon, the paints that are off-gassing, and certainly the way they were produced. Uh, all of these levels that they're considered safe in a realm that is extraordinarily misinformed, rather than a space of knowledge, a space of intimacy where we know where the last screw came from, where we know, of course, the metal mind from that screw has its own infrastructures of storytelling that need to be acknowledged and recognized. And nothing is pure. I'm not looking for purity. I'm not looking for any sort of, again, safety. Um, but I do find that shocking and predictable. And it's that, for example, I found out yesterday that the Science Nature backpacking, it's only a 2 week trip with the High Mountain Institute in Leadville, Colorado. They can't proceed because, as far as I know, Zazu, my son,
Okay.
we're the only ones who have signed up. Same thing in our community for the backpacking trip for teenagers. I think it's 12 to 16. No one is signing up except for my son. And these are phenomenal outdoor education programs for teenagers, for young people, and people. The Nature Connection, the outdoor education nonprofit in our community, separate from the one I just mentioned, had to cancel their backpacking trips because their interest is simply not there because people don't feel safe sending their kids backpacking
Okay. Okay.
because they're attached to, I'm assuming, a sense of beauty in their homes and
Yeah.
familiarity that involves these things, this,
Yes.
that involves hyper production, capitalist cradle of ease
Yeah.
since in utero. And so, in that, yes, I am shocked, I am horrified, yet it's unbelievably obvious. And my first response is go out there and just start talking to as many parents as possible. See if I can encourage the parents, the kids, to consider doing something that I do feel could have a radical rerouting
Yeah.
of what needs to happen among millions of other actions that need to take place individually and collectively. But
Mhm.
to get our kids outside in a state of intellectual, simultaneous intellectual, physical, physiological, spiritual, relational experience.
Yeah. That's great. So does your son shock you at all sometimes in their values?
Oh, of course. In Zazu's, yeah, I mean, again, it's shock and absolutely predictable. I mean, we have horrendous arguments,
Yeah.
which I may
Okay.
have mentioned, about video games,
Yeah. I
how
haven't
he
heard the
wants to,
details. I haven't heard the
yeah,
details. So if you
yeah,
feel that's fine. Great.
yeah. Well, this all relates to what I write about with petroleum parenting, with apocalyptic parenting as an antidote to petroleum
Okay.
parenting.
Good. Yep.
And I'm not sure where we trespassed
We didn't
last
go very
time
far. We didn't go
with
very far in it.
these realms. Um, but yes, I am teetering. One of my photography titles from the 90s was My Precarious Everything is Almost. And I feel that is also my parenting. That's in my art practice as a photographer, as a video artist, as a writer, as a pedagogical committed being, that it is as one of my mother's titles for one of her paintings is Scaling the Edge of the Abyss. I mean, that is that certainly is parenting for me. And I did have some questions for you about
Yeah.
parenting too with your kids, because you mentioned
Yeah.
what felt like at least a class distinction, and maybe a socio-political distinction too. But
Yeah.
we can re-enter that as we unfold.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I mean, we can circle a lot around a lot of things, but I am interested in sort of the simple question is are we scaring our kids? And I'm actually talking about us.
Yeah,
It'd be easy to talk
yeah,
about are we scaring our kids, right? And there's people writing books about that, and some people say yes, we are. Some people say no, we're not. Um, but I'm actually interested, yeah, because we started this in the conversation with us, is that here we are, so-called very alternative types, um, progressive, and all those labels that you
tragically,
and
I
I
would say
get,
yes.
tragically so. And the side of is really interested to our viewers is how are we scaring our kids? And I want to just maybe talk about class as it appeared in the relationship with my children, which was
Sure.
again
Yeah,
having to go as a
yeah, yeah.
boomer, having a Gen X, Gen Y, kind of Gen X bordered children. I had them later in life, and one of the things I would say was actually quite a division between my children and I. Yeah, when I say division, it's an inserted ideology of the way to live. And in other words, Dad, why aren't you normal? Dad, can't you just be normal? And so this is coming, yeah, the myth of normal, or which one you got? Empire of Normality. Okay, I haven't seen that one. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Neurodiversity and capitalism. And of course,
It just happens to be right here.
that's tough as a parent. It's tough as a parent. You're handling that. I was pretty cool about it. And one of the things I've in retroflect is that I realized I think my children have it pretty damn good. Now, we were poor. We I had no capital security growing up with my wife at that time. And
Is that
then,
what poverty is? I'm so curious. What is poverty?
yeah,
Yeah,
what
I
is
mean, in these
poverty?
frames.
I mean, just
Yeah,
in the frame of, you know, yeah, no secure paycheck, no secure land that I can say I have a place to live, even. We're
security.
renting and we could be out on a 3-month notice from a landlord. Uh, I've lived
Absolutely.
that
We rent
way.
our land.
I
Yeah,
lived that way and I
or the
still
land
live
community.
that way to this day. I'm still a renter, and not that it's the answer, but I choose not to buy and purchase property or seek to do so. Maybe I would with a collective, but I don't do it on my own. And so all of those things led my children, and through a divorce early when they're 5 and 3, um, their mother, who was took the vow of poverty as an ex-nun and was very spiritual into this. By the time she had to be a single mom, then it was once security really big time. And then my children are getting double messages. Dad's really relaxed. He's cool. Mom is freaking out. She doesn't have much money to get through the month. And then we're living
Uh-huh,
in really
uh-huh,
rough places. So when they're in their 20s and
yes,
30s,
yes,
here's the statement that I have to deal with. I'm sure at some point you can conceive of it, or maybe you've heard of it,
yes.
is dad, it's cool what you're doing. Okay, fine. But I want to let you know is that you put us at risk on more
At
than one
risk.
occasion, at risk for dangers of living in bad neighborhoods where it's not secured, invaders in the doors, kicking in doors, because their mother lives in poverty and does not have the financials, and I don't have the financials to give to her or them. And so, Dad, why are you being an artist doing all those creative things? Why don't you get a job so that you can give the
Be
full
real.
payment, and that would help us be more less at risk. So
Right.
that's about fear. It's like they would argue I put them in an unnecessary amount of fear because of my creative, innovative, I think authentic, and yet I'm looking at them, even in their tough times when they feel
Yeah,
at risk, I'm going, you still have it really good. It's not wonderful, it's not ideal, but in my mind, I didn't actually say that. I would never say that. It's just like that would be so hard to say to them or their mother. You actually have it really pretty good. Now, so you see, that's what happens with more knowledge, more context. I'm looking at the through a critical lens of the world, capitalist
right.
critical critique of capitalism, etc., and class. I come from a working poor family situation. I grew up in that. So I have all this resiliency and familiarity within the aesthetics of the poor working class. And
Mhm.
my daughters don't. Like they actually live it, but the imaginary that's influencing them from their friends, from the need to
Everything.
secure, and we just
Yes.
went like this. And I've never recovered it.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
We may at some point be able to have those
As
conversations,
father,
but that takes a lot of capability. And when they're still raw, even in their
yes,
40s, they're still raw
yes.
that you didn't really secure us in many ways. And
Mhm,
it's hard for
mhm.
them to forgive. And I'm not even saying that's the problem,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm actually trying to say it's a much bigger problem getting to
Right,
the
right.
point.
You're
So
you're you're
this is
talking about,
this is a class problem. So go ahead, Kara.
yeah,
Cara.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're speaking about something much more
Yeah.
pervasive. And when you said the aesthetics of poverty, or the poor, I'd like to do
Mhm.
actually. Do you want to address that that phrase, and then
Yeah.
we can go into this a little?
Well, I mean, one of the
What
simple,
does that mean?
yeah, many things, of course, but I think one of the ones I come to very quickly is I'm very interested in the research behind the anthropology of dirt and
Aha,
Mary Douglas's work way back in the
purity
50s and 60s. Yes,
in the abstract. Yeah,
purity, danger, all those ideas around dirt and protection from illness, disease, and the marginal, and how they all tie into that, and it becomes called part of a culture of fear, and how it
right.
still is operating today with all
The taboo,
the cleansing and cleaning, and you can just hear all those metaphors tying into this
100%.
huge, violent,
Yeah,
vicious, epistemically
yes,
vicious way we cleanse the world.
yes.
And this is what my
Yeah,
daughters would say ultimately when they say they're
it
at risk.
is
They're at risk in too dirty of a world.
right. And that goes back to right the idea of safety,
Yeah.
and what is supposedly safe is actually killing us.
Yeah.
It's
There you
it's
go.
it what is safe so often represents chemically, literally,
Mm-hmm.
the elementally, the toxins that are destroying our cellular structure, but also our humanity in so many ways. And when we look at purity of blood in my family's background as a Sephardic Jew and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, and that was based on our contaminated blood. That was based on uh, um, I mean, Jews have always been seen as contaminants, social contaminants, feeding off, parasitically feeding off the host of the norm. And there's a book that I pulled out here, Voluntary Simplicity. Is it out right here? Um, and
Yeah.
this is interesting because it's not talking about capitalism per se, it's talking about equilibrium. Um, and when, for example, this was also in Oakland recently, um, at an Eco Art Matters class. It was a class for artists at Laney College in Oakland, and one of the students got very upset with me because they were saying that they live in a food desert, and that I had the privilege of living in a bus, um, and that I was taking my own entitlement as a supposedly white person, um, light skinned. Obviously, I'm light skinned. That's a whole other conversation in terms of passing, um, but that I was not acknowledging the complexities of poverty and access. However, when we're dealing with a white supremacist entrenched economy and equality is rooted in those norms, our replication of what you're saying, of the cleansing, of the stripping down of multiplicity, the stripping down of many ways of being in relation to economic vitality, we're perpetuating that cycle of have and have not. We're perpetuating these binaries of wealth and poverty. We're perpetuating the illusion that wealth is safety, that access to hospitals, access to education, quote unquote, compulsory education, um, access to running water, access to a flush toilet is safety. And all of those worlds are so, again, obfuscated. There's so many veils of misinformation, not just wrapped around them, but weaving, but actually constructing the mechanism of oppression, of these interlocking oppressions. And that, how can we collectively begin to uproot those illusions of safety, those illusions of cleanliness in a world where, when I wrote Zazu Dreams Between the Scarab and the Dung Beetle, a cautionary fable for the Anthropocene era, when I wrote that, the original uh, edition came out in 2017, the hand sanitizer business was, I think, something 900 million, something like that. I think $913 million annually pre-COVID. I mean, as we can imagine, what and I don't know those numbers anymore, but in terms of these illnesses that we define as health,
That's right.
when the hospitals are cathedrals of illness. I'm forgetting. I cite uh, the MacArthur Award winner who who classified that in my text on women on violence and resistance, an anthology out of the University of Tunis in Tunisia. where I focus on gender, uh, uh, pharmaceutical gender justice in the pharmaceutical or injustice in the pharmaceutical industry. Um, but as a parent and trying to raise our children with values that are counter to this cleansing tyranny, it's extraordinary. And I feel so deeply for you and your challenge with your 40-year-old kids. And I wonder, what Zazu, he's 13 now. I took him, I don't know if I mentioned last time, in my attempt to invite multiplicity and invite connectivity. I took him to a voodoo community
Hmm.
in uh, Ouida in Benin, West Africa, when he was 11.
Okay.
Did I mention this
No,
in our last
no,
conversation? No.
no.
Um, and I lost friends because they said it was unsafe,
Right.
that I physically and emotionally jeopardized my young child. Someone even threatened to take me to CPS, to
Yes.
Child
Yes.
Protection Services. And I have a lot to say about that. When Zazu, I'll just say briefly, he was in a ski accident when he was 5. And because I refused certain things and with the
Yeah.
emergency room, a CPS, did I mention this before?
No.
No, okay. A CPS worker came to my home and questioned me as a fit mother.
Yeah. Child Protection Services, CPS, just for anybody.
Yeah. And that is all about cleanliness.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all about the anthropology of dirt and not understanding anything about our microbiomes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
about the complexity of our physiologies and our histories of bodily integrity, let alone community integrity.
Yep. So what I ended up doing in my research was I just was looking for all the different threads of what, because, you know, 1990s, late 1990s, there were
Yeah,
sociologists coming out and talking about culture of fear. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting construct. You know, we're not just talking about fear as an emotion per se, as individualized. Now we're talking about a culture of fear. I thought this was like a huge jump in consciousness. I was very excited, right? I'm very excited that, oh, wow, we're finally going to get this awareness that our
yeah,
culture and the culture, what it's doing, and of course, that's a very troubled word in all one, but just in the certain sense of it is not itself, neutral at all. I mean, it is saying it is a culture of
yes,
fear or a culture of terror, as some
yeah,
Chomsky's came out and they were studying some of the Latin American regimes and terrorism
yes,
and they used the culture of fear. Actually, that concept came out of the studies of the Latin America, the South Cone during the dictatorships in the 60s and 70s, and a bunch of
Pinochet, right,
researchers
which is,
quoted, culture of fear was at the base of what happened to the population, what happened on the outside, what happened on the internal side of the oppression, and how it stabilized a culture of fear or terrorism.
yes.
So
And I've
that's
been
why
thinking
I
so much
stuck
about
with it.
Pinochet now,
Have you?
in terms of what's going on in
Yeah,
contemporary in
right.
our world. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
been visiting a lot, unfortunately. Yeah, and I just want to say, in terms of
you bet.
the idea of neutrality, in Viscous Expectations,
Oh, yeah, let's
this
share.
is uh, my first philosophy art book, Justice, Vulnerability, the Obscene. One of the chapters is on the illusion, the illusion of neutrality in 21st century democracy. And I'll just say the subheadings, all related. Mediocrity, morality, and the sanctity of normalcy is the first
Yeah,
subchapter.
sanctity,
Uh,
sanctity.
self-censorship, self-censorship, toxic mimicry, internalized fascism, and phallic norms, and then internalized apartheids. And the last one in chapter, this is chapter 1, institutionalized anti-intellectualism. So for me, this cleansing in relation to the abject,
Yeah.
absolutely, and the abject of our bodies, the grotesqueness, the primality, the carnality of our bodies, absolutely bound with institutionalized anti-intellectualism, with fear of thinking, of asking questions, at the foundation of the Talmud,
And
to ask
even
questions,
even
to see
even
ourselves reflected.
and even back to what I find in Gnosticism, in ancient
Yeah,
Gnosticism, is this idea that the body is just the vehicle. We really are spirit, and the body is always secondary, and just we can get out of that and get beyond, and
matter.
we'll go into a transcendentalism there, and so on. So deep, deep, right in the cosmological imaginaries that I talk about. What about in your work?
Yeah.
Have you ever honed in on studying fear? I mean, you obviously are constantly implicit. It's always there implicit. Do you ever feel like, oh, I should maybe look at fear and anxiety more, or what? Just I'm just curious as a researcher and an artist, how you've entangled with fear.
Let's see, fear and anxiety. So I had a funny experience
Uh-huh.
last year with Zazu. We watched Inside Out 2.
Don't know it.
It's an animation. It's Disney, and I had a huge epiphany. Um, I was delighted and horrified. Again, that was a perfect example of being both and simultaneously. Um, the anxiety character, their
Uh-huh. I've
characters
heard, yeah.
represent different hormonal relationships. Um, and the anxiety character, 100% mirror of me. I was, I embarrassed Zazie to no end, screeching with delight as we watched it. We were in a public space. Um, and yeah, and I hadn't realized how much fear is wrapped up in the hormonal experience of anxiety and what it means as a woman. I'll be 54 in April. Zazu and I share our birthday. He'll be 14. I'll be 54 coming up as in my menopausal state. How much those hormones of anxiety are are integral to my sociopolitical, to my language of aesthetics, basically. Um, rather than something to sublimate, rather than something to individualize and to render uh, separate from all of these unbelievably entangled worlds. How can we take on anxiety? And I used to teach stress reduction workshops as an Iyengar yoga teacher for years in San Francisco. And I thought, I know stress so well. This is I can teach this. And they were beautiful exchanges with my students for many, many years. And I didn't necessarily explicitly politicize it then.
Mhm.
But now I think more than ever, I am in my photographs and in my writing speaking about parenting, identifying as a vulnerability facilitator, for example.
Okay.
That for me is very much rooted
Okay.
in a commitment to examining fear from multiple simultaneous perspectives.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You said in your
Uh,
last conversation, and I just want to maybe tweak it a bit with you, is if, as I understood, you said something to the effect that if we lived in a pluriverse as much as possible, if we could really make these identity shifts out of a lot of these hegemonies we're talking about today, that you said there would be this almost impossibility that fear could ever become a primary motivator. It would
mhm,
have no
mhm.
chance to stick
To adhere.
in that
Right, right. Yeah,
contagion effect, etc.
yeah.
Because we're in some sense, I'm just trying to understand it. I think I got it, and I went, yeah, yeah, for sure. If
Yeah,
you're disidentifying and have a fluid identification,
exactly.
right, where
The
you can
disidentification.
rotate, you can move back, you can go back to it. It's not like dissing one or the other, and that um, complicated identification
Mhm.
process would prevent the stickiness of the fear because you get into one perspective, you
Yeah,
feel then you have to defend it. And of course, if you hold on to it, you can bet you're going to meet a whole bunch of people who don't agree with you
yeah, yeah.
and could actually take out your life because you don't agree with them. And that's happened historically. We are traumatized by that if I am the other.
Those,
And that
right,
is the
right.
object, right? That is the object automatically because you've chosen that
Yes.
perspective. So is that
And
somewhat similar to where you were going?
absolutely, yes, em, embodying the grotesque, embodying the
Okay,
monster
okay. Keep going
within.
then.
Um, when I collaborated with Julia Kristeva in Berlin, how many years ago? 16, I think 16 years ago. Um, with my photographs projected behind her as she spoke about Teresa d'Avila,
Oh,
who
wow.
was Sephardic
Oh, was she? Oh,
and a nun,
okay.
both.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
again, she was straddling all kinds
All
of
right.
political indecencies, um, grotesqueries, and when we when I say embody, it's such an overused word, like indigenous and sustainability, like trauma. Um, but when we can take into ourselves, into our cellular memory, transforming our ancestral linkages physio physiologically, um,
Yeah.
quantumly, the capacity for finding unpredictable affinities,
Mm.
the capacity for promiscuous crossings,
Okay. Yep.
the
Yeah.
capacity for empathy. Again, going back to empathy, the capacity to find a sense of intimacy with what is deemed trash, um, what is deemed unproductive, um, superfluous.
You just
What is
described
Voltaire's
you've just described the placenta there,
the,
by the way.
the placenta?
It's all of
The
those things. Trash, you get rid of it.
the placenta. You know, it's right here.
Yeah, you told me in the last
Oh,
video. I saw
oh. Yes, the placenta. Oh, I love that. A placental. Yes. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about your placental
well,
connection.
I'm surrounded by some radical spiritual feminists for years and years and decades and married one. Anyway,
And
very into
placentas
they're
lurk.
very into the placenta and the placenta work and
Yeah.
placental thinking and consciousness.
And there's a connection between disposability. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that very surface, which they're talking about the mother's body to the new body, and they grow off the same base. Each
The
is
promiscuous crossing
yeah, and so we don't
there.
we don't respect that cross, or they're neither one nor the other. And
Right.
and, and
Neti
this and
neti
this
in
so
Sanskrit.
right. So as soon as you get the individual, then finally releases from comes out the womb, we just get rid of that placenta, yank
Yes.
it out,
And that's a
garbage
whole
can. And that's not
right.
historically or culturally the way women have dealt with the placenta, right? This
No,
is
no,
a
no, of
very
course.
medicalized Western material, male,
Yes.
and so on. So
Yes. Well, a
uh,
couple things about that.
go
What
for it.
in Zazu's placenta, there was actually a second placenta embedded in that, and that was a strange story, which we can explore at another time. But we ended up eating raw that mini placenta that was embedded, and then we
Did the
dehydrated
tattoo.
and ate the other. Um, but in terms in Viscous Expectations, um, I explore the cord blood banking industry, which is a horrendously profitable industry that right after the baby is born,
Mhm.
uh, the cord blood is taken from
Didn't
what
know.
would go into the neonate and stored, and it's extraordinarily expensive. It's depleting beyond belief for the new being's body.
Okay.
Um, so there's all, and it has to do with some stem cell research, and
Yeah.
so that's a
Okay.
whole industry, and
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
linked that to illusions of self-reliance, independence, these perversities that are the bedrock of our epidemic of individualism,
Yeah.
um,
Nice.
and and what that means in terms of motherhood. And again, of course, this is all part of petroleum parenting and medicalized births, and digital technologies that are replacing our intuitive uh, intimacies with our unborn
Yeah.
beings within us, and not just babies, but also our creative potential, um, our potential for radical resistance, collective radical resistance. In all of these realms, I think are deeply bound
Mhm.
together. They breathe life into each other when we give them the opportunity through vulnerability. Again, through those coexisting pluriverse.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just tell a very brief story. I think might be connected to a few of these things. So at the daycare center, I was an artist. I brought in a dump truck load of gravel. I think I mentioned to you, and dumped it on the grounds in the parking lot. And I was going to work with the teachers and the kids for 6 months with a pile of gravel. This is commercial gravel, and it is the rock that's blown up from the mountains here. So I
From
had all kinds
the
of
quarry.
symbolic reasons. Yeah, I got from the
Okay.
local quarry.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and of course, it looks like the gravel that everybody's putting on their driveways, and that was on the driveway of the parking lot of the daycare center, and people are
Sure.
driving on top of it. And I wanted to put it into a sanctuary space, right? To actually
Yes.
take those same stones and create something that could be sculpted, could be worked with. It was a play space, it was a gallery, it was a pop up studio, fundamentally.
Love it. I
So,
love it.
so 6 months of that, and of course, everybody's going,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know if we're going to keep the kids interested in that. So
Well, or the
here's where I'm
adults.
going.
I'm
Or
curious.
the
Yeah.
adults, yeah, their staff, and of course the community, because I was actually outside of the fence of the daycare where I had it dumped. So I'm right in this community, and it's
Uh,
definitely a working poor type community, and
uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
had lots of street walkers and lots of drug problems and all kinds of things that
Uh-huh.
we have in the inner city. And
Right.
so
Yes.
all of
Yes.
that
Yes.
was an interesting place of risk for me. And what I was constantly trying to do is to get the staff and the kids to come out and play with me
The story of these rocks.
outside of the fence. The
Yes.
container of
Yes.
security was so
Right.
symbolic. I
Yes.
didn't
The
even realize
safety
a
realm.
lot of
Yeah.
these things until I got in there and started realizing what was going on. I
Yeah.
was just kind of working with a material that will last 6 months and not deteriorate.
See.
I could
But then you
put
became attuned to
Oh yeah,
your own
the
sensitivity.
journey of what I had to face and my own concern about putting myself in those spaces. And
Yes.
then what am I doing trying to draw the children into those spaces? It's dirty. The
100%.
rocks are dirty. They were covered with dust and they're collecting dust. They're collecting pollution from the environment.
I was going to say the
People
lead from
are pissing
the
on them,
exhaust. Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
pile because it was a pile, and so dogs, people, animals, and I'm
Right.
still trying to,
It's a collective.
I was trying to just bring, but I want to tell you the key focus was on one of the activities. Is we did a ritual. Was working with a pedagogist from the university here, and we did a
Okay.
ritual where we got the kids coming out, 12 or so kids, and these are 3 to 5 year olds, and the teachers
Oh, they're
coming.
young.
Yep, very young, daycare, so preschool, and got them coming through the gate, and we do a little ritual, the bell, and everything was, won't go into all the details, but it was very artistic. And then kind of marching them down to the playground, and I was going to introduce myself, and I had a little costume on, and I was waiting for them, and they're all attentive. And this is, well, we're going to allow you to just go onto the pile of stones. And I had flattened it by that time. It was pretty thick, but I flattened. And I says, you're going to be able to make your own place where you can create art. And we call that an art studio. And so there's a bunch of art studios, but you're going to be able to make your own, and then you can play and make and create there. That
Yes.
was basically the curriculum. And
Just with a rock. Yeah.
and so it's because the rocks are all there. And
Right.
you got some boys, you got some girls, you got, so the 3 5 year old. Well, a fascinating experience to watch, not only for the staff, the three staff that are with them, and then to watch the children. And here's what I experienced, which I think is most important, because we talked about anxiety. I watched
Mhm.
half of the class be able to sort of, there was, two or three boys that totally into it. Man, they're drilling down. I'm putting a flag of Alaska here. This is my property. And they're digging tunnels and joining.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then several, three or four, five, six, kind of sitting there playing in their space, made their little studio, but didn't really,
Contained.
totally into it. And then there was six, a third of them,
Yeah.
crying
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
as they sat or are holding on to the teacher's hand
The adult. Hmm.
and could not free themselves from their anxiety
Hmm.
of sitting in the mid. They might sort of touch a little and do a little, and then
It would get on them.
they start to vibrate. They're
Hmm.
literally in an anxious state. And I
Hmm.
kept
Hmm.
trying to
Yeah.
suggest and hold a space. I would connect with them and hold the
Yeah.
space, try to work with it as best I could. But my takeaway, Cara, was that we don't give children enough opportunities to be in a mediated, anxious place
Right.
that should be about
Yeah.
play,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
art, making art, play, but
Right.
it actually
Experimentation.
is not. It's about connecting with your environment.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
for our new children, and these were
Yeah.
COVID babies, these are COVID little kids for the most part, right?
Uh-huh. Hmm. That phrase is
Isn't it horrible to even say it? I hate
shuddering.
it.
Yeah.
I hate
Yeah.
it. But when
Yeah.
you're in daycare,
Yeah.
we notice
You
a
see it.
difference, and the
You see
staff are
it.
telling us. And
Yeah.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden, they're anxious about being just in the elemental environment. So,
Well,
how
that
would
certainly goes
you
back.
go ahead?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly goes back to what I was saying about these teenagers and
Mm,
preteens
mm,
and elementary school kids and toddlers. Yeah. Just not, and where their parents aren't signing them up
yeah,
for potential programs that could disrupt these mechanisms of absolute disassociation from our own bodies, the world around us. When sex ed becomes whether or not you're taking a shower or using deodorant and having nothing to do with masturbation or any kind of sensory
yeah,
experience, mindfulness, when they're eating their little boxed raisins,
yep,
being with the raisin, that interbeingness.
yep,
And that's uh, I can't accept that as a parent, obviously. For my child to be in environments where that is the norm,
yeah,
which is one reason why he's going to a school so far away where the norm is intimacy, the norm is relationality. It is those elemental
yeah,
aspects, because otherwise we are just breeding anxiety so embedded in the illusion of safety, so nested in the illusion of neutrality.
yeah.
And we are our complicity and lack of willingness to think beyond these strictures um, is deafening, which is why I'm speaking to you, because hopefully our conversations will ignite some possibility of people either recognizing the realms that they feel empowered within and then amplifying them,
Yeah.
or using their sense of disempowerment, again, working actively with the sense of vulnerability. If people sense this isn't right, something about this doesn't, watching my child respond for whatever reason, there may be multiple reasons
For
why those
sure.
six
For sure.
children had those responses.
For sure.
However, knowing society as it is, knowing racial capitalist settler colonialism as it is, it makes sense. And it's not acceptable, aside from the particularities that need to be addressed as specifics to those individuals or in conjunction.
Yeah. Another example just at the daycare was, and I asked you at the end of the last video, I says, I'd really like you
Oh,
to
yeah.
be
To visit.
work at our place
Yeah.
or visit our place. I was, just half joking, half real. And one of the things I've noticed being there 4 years is, and the HR person as well there, is that I said to the director the other day, I said, one of the things I've noticed is we used to have really cool people with tattoos
Oh,
that used to work here.
and no longer
No longer do. It
is
was
is
symbolic.
that
Like
conscious.
it would be
Yeah.
people like you who they would come out and they would just do activities with the kids. They dressed not nice, normal middle class. They were more on that
Actually.
hippie side, organic side,
Oh,
play a little bit different music on the field. And I said, in 4 years, we've become very effective
what's
and
happened?
very
Oh,
efficient as an
right.
organization.
Efficiency.
We have less
Yes.
problems. We have less problems with staff.
Means
It's amazing. And yet I can see
diversity
I'm
has
like part
been
of it.
stripped.
And I'm part of it because, you don't want those conflicts. You don't want the staff
And why
going
not?
against the admin. Well, at one level, it's just a pain in the butt because we don't have the time and people are tired and
Right.
now we've got conflict and then
But
they're
those
starting.
smoothly cogged wheels or
And
smoothly
so
turning
what,
wheels
that's what I
just
watched.
right.
I
It's
watched how
erasure.
easy that erasure, and it was symbolic, but
And
it's
how that's
real.
influencing the children.
And I just went, what's happening? The children are not getting
Yeah.
exposure anymore to
Well, so I'm
to
wondering
that
in
those
terms of
kinds of
wheels,
human beings.
when being the person who is the person who raises their hand and asks those questions that
Hmm.
everyone in my community, I think not everyone, but enough people roll their eyes, here she goes again,
Hmm.
situation
Yep, I hear you.
constantly every
I
week.
hear you. Yep.
Um, what does it mean to be in a place of anxiety, of fear recognition, of squeakiness,
Mhm.
of this is not seamless. This is about friction. Being alive is about friction. How do we do that in a way that doesn't just generate more anxiety? For example, I'm working on a project now with a democracy. It's a call for democracy grant with the Perlman Center for the Arts in New York in the World Trade Center. Um, and I am putting together a proposal of supply chain. So going back to our first conversation, supply chain consciousness, representing it in the most mundane, everyday, reproducible kind of environment. Someone wakes up in the morning. Um, how do they wake up? Is their smartphone, not their flip phone, is their smartphone uh, vibrating using tungsten from a mine in the Congo. Um, what are they wearing? Are they wearing synthetic fibers, dealing with the whole fast fashion tyrannies compared to their local fiber shed? So dealing with bioregions in relation to taken for granted consumer corporatized norms of inhabiting our space, of of being embodied, not just efficient, but actually being in those uncomfortable spaces. And so my two main challenges are, how do I communicate these issues that don't, one, generate more anxiety and
Yep.
leave people feeling more disempowered and more fearful, and two, how not to be a moralistic, just ranting
Yeah.
as with the criticism, self-righteous,
The virtues list.
sanctimony
I
is,
call it
what did you say?
the virtues list.
Yeah. Well, oh, it's so
I
grotesque.
know.
I mean, that is grotesque. Bodily functions are not grotesque. The virtues list, that is grotesque. That is dangerous.
It's very
That
dangerous.
it's that needs to be redefined in terms of safety. So that's a question I have,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, with child rearing and as educators, just as people living on this planet, how to address those
Yep.
two worlds in a world that is deeply anti-intellectual, deeply body phobic, deeply phobic of the unfamiliar,
Death phobic.
and death phobic. Yeah, yeah. My God, yeah. And how do we generate a sense of empowerment, community, collective risk taking that isn't, oh, well, you can do that because you're privileged, because you're
Yeah. Yeah.
entitled, uh,
Yeah.
because you're educated,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, great questions. That's just the first thing I want to say. Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's so if your viewers, for example, my work is deeply, deeply collaborative, and I do work with people from all kinds of perspectives and realities. And if I'm assuming if people are watching, we're on similar pages already. However, I would love suggestions about how to deal with those extraordinary challenges, again, with parenting, with being in communities with other parents who
Yeah.
find me very distasteful, because I am rocking the boat. And as far as I'm concerned, there isn't even water in the riverbed any longer. So I don't even know why we're concerned about rocking the boat. It's like the focal point for the tension and the focal point for the conflict aversion, you know, fearing the tension,
Yeah.
um, is so, I find, so misplaced, oddly misplaced. And again, I am shocked.
Yeah. In
It's
our
2025.
it is, and
How are we?
in our last conversation, just for viewers, we have to go. I have to go here anyway. Um, Cara and I did talk about some revisioning, recalibrating of the idea of collapse. Was one of the focuses, which
Collapse.
is very similar, and re-understanding
Again,
and
the
the
apocalypse. Yeah.
apocalypse, the apocalyptic
As extraordinary
imaginaries. Yep,
as
and joy in a whole new
revelatory. Yeah.
way. Very interested
In
to
community.
get community. So yeah, let's just maybe wrap up with a few bits here,
Yeah.
Cara, and um, we didn't get to evil. It's two
Oh,
videos. We
yes.
didn't get to evil. It's getting erased. Maybe a third one somewhere down the line, but maybe it's not
Uh,
important either.
Let me just say, I think
Go
this whole
ahead.
thing has been about evil. It's been about the
All
banality
right.
of evil. It's been, I mean, Hannah Arendt is right here with us. This is the safety, the neutrality, me being told I need to compromise when, yes, of course, we all need to be in a state of flux. However, when living in this world, in the world of normalcy, in the empire of normality, is inherently a violent compromise and a compromise. But yes, evil. I think that's what we've been speaking
Mm,
about.
mm, mm. And I guess I'll just piggyback on that a little is that evil comes up for me in my life in very real relationships. I'm not just abstractly here philosophically
No, it's
exploring
very real.
evil. Yeah, and this goes way back to my 1980s. And I come in and out of, the value of it, and I usually put it in scare marks in the word itself, just to keep it under deconstruction and reconstruction. And
It's alive.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And I, I guess one of the things that is hardest for me is it's hard, when people make decisions, let's call it in ignorance, or a type of ignorance that they don't know certain things or have not been exposed to, or etc. I'm a lot more forgiving. It's more when people actually know the ways to better routes, and I've actually traveled with them on those emancipatory routes, and then they step out.
Yes.
That's like the alternative communities that we both have explored and been with. They know so much. They've made certain decisions, and then there's a place where, well, that's as far as I want to go. And in fact, not only that, I'm actually going to go in the other direction.
I, right.
That
And
for me,
blockade. Yeah.
that for me is where I like to put evil. And it's not
Yeah.
blaming it that
Yeah.
person. It's not
No,
even, it
no,
isn't, is
it's
it? It's
I I yeah.
go ahead.
I feel the same in liberal progressive communities. That's where I feel the most hostility, the most resistance, the most anguish, the most refusal to be in dialogue.
Oh, it's sad.
And 100%, which is why those unanticipated affinities are so critical that we're open to breaking through these binaries and these assumptions. And to remember that to be heretical, to be a heretic is to be in a place of choice. And of course, the rhetoric of choice. I mean, that's
Yes.
all hacked. And none of this is inevitable. And to believe in its inevitable, in its inevitability, is submission to the evil, which of course is not, we're not talking about binaries here. It's
Yeah,
obviously
I
much more
agree.
of a
I
web.
agree. We are
And it's
not
that web
talking
that
about
leads to potential transformation.
yeah,
It's the both and. It's
yeah,
an image from Zazu Dreams of the Alaska Malamute digging at the roots of things that we think are positive replacements for capitalist fossil fuel addicted economies, like supposedly renewable energies. We're digging at that and we're seeing that that actually is part of the capitalist evil.
yeah,
So the idea of evil with its tendrils and us being wrapped and embodied, embedded in those structures, I feel can be
yeah,
emancipatory.
yeah,
And yes, when we are with people, like you're saying, Daniel Ellsberg in Pentagon Papers, fabulous quote about the Vietnam War, how people, he said something about the people, they see it, they understand it, and yet they proceed to
yeah,
ignore.
yeah. That's exactly. Great to be with you again.
Thank you. We are not ignoring. We're right here together. Thank you, Michael. It's
We
a
got it.
delight. Looking
Yeah,
forward to continuing conversations. And if you want to
yeah,
put my contact, I'm happy for further conversation with some of your viewers and
indeed.
possible collaboration. Okay. Enjoy.
Bye bye.
Take good care.